we're starting with some sewing on the front of the dress. So I have my lining piece and my outside piece. Now your pattern you should hang on to until you're done the project, because sometimes you need to go back and check where markings are, and so you want to have that handy. So you're going to start by putting these right sides together. So this is the right side of that piece. I'm going to put my stripe right side down, so right side's in the center, and I'm going to pin around the outside edges. Now I'm not going to pin the bottom because I'm not going to sew there, but you want to line up the neckline edge, make sure these notches are lined up with each other. If you cut everything out accurately, they should come fit right together. Just like that. So we're going to be sewing these two pieces together. So start on one side. Your stitch length should be 2.5 or 2.6, and I'm lining up on the 1.5 line here. And you're going to lock your stitches by sewing forward and back and forward. And I'm using a little bit darker thread on this. Normally I would probably use a white thread, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to sew until I'm about 3 centimeters from the top edge here. And when I'm at that point, I'm going to shorten my stitch length to 1.5. And we're doing, this is called the corner method, because we have to do some trimming here that's going to be very close to the thread. We want it to be more secure, so a shorter stitch length will do that. Now I'm going to sew until I am 1.5 centimeters away from the edge. And there is a mark on your sewing machine at that point. It's right here beside the cover for the bobbin. And my machine doesn't have that same mark, but I'm pretty good at estimating, but I'm going to check anyway. So when you think you're 1.5 from the edge, you want to stop with your needle down and then pivot and see, and I need to go one more stitch. So I'm going to check again. Now once you're 1.5 from the edge, you actually don't fully turn. You're going to do one diagonal stitch. So you're going to raise your needle and lower your needle. And you can use the hand wheel or you can use the needle up down button. And then we're going to pivot the full rest of the way. Now I'm going to sew across here until I'm 1.5 centimeters from this edge here. So again, I'm looking at where my fabric is. I'm keeping that short 1.5 stitch length. And I think that looks pretty good. Let's do one more. Yeah. Now again, I'm doing one diagonal stitch. Needle up, needle down, and turning. And now I'm going to follow down to this dot. It looks like the dot's a little inaccurate according to the measurements on my machine. But it is important because once I get down here, I no longer will be able to see any markings on my machine. So I'm going to come up to that dot, and again, keeping the 1.5 stitch length. And I can turn and check here. I need to go a couple more stitches, at least maybe 2 or 3. And one more. So that dot is accurate on this side. All right, and once I'm 1.5 centimeters away, again, one diagonal stitch up and down, and then I'm going to turn and sew across here. Now, it's up to you. You can keep that short stitch length, but you don't have to all the way. So I am going to go back to 2.5 until I get to this pin, and then I'm going to shorten it again. I'm going to do a couple more stitches there. Now I'm going to go back to 1.5, sew up to the dot, and I'm going to check where I am here. I need to go one more, and then one diagonal stitch up, down, and then I'm going to turn And now I'm going to keep that 1.5 as I go around the top here again. And checking, I need to do one more diagonal stitch. And again, checking. Let's do one more. One diagonal stitch. And then sew down here. Now after a couple centimeters, you can go back to 2.5 again. And I'm going to sew to the bottom. And backstitch. Cut your threads on both ends. So that should look like this when you're done. Now while we're at the machine, we're actually going to sew the straps together as well. So you're going to take the pins out, and you do each of these separately. So we're going to fold it in half the long way, right sides together, like so. And again, it doesn't hurt to put a pin in there. And 1.5 centimeters from one of the edges. Backstitch. Sewing down the side. And when you get a couple centimeters, we want to go back to 1.5. We also need to trim this. Now I'm going to sew until I'm 1.5 centimeters from the edge. So, needle down, I'm going to pivot and check, do one more stitch, and then one diagonal stitch up and down, and then I'm going to leave it short and go right to the fold line and backstitch and cut your threads. And you're going to do the same with the other one. Now we're going to do some clipping, trimming, and grading on this piece. So you're going to start by trimming the entire piece. And what that means is you cut almost half of the seam allowance off. The seam allowance is the distance between the seam and the edge of the fabric. So we're going to cut half of that off all the way around. The notches we don't need anymore. They were just there to line up, so you cut straight across. You don't need to cut those around those. So I've cut my seam about half what it was before. Now to grade it, we're actually going to cut the white side, the lining, a little bit shorter than the other one. This is called grading. And what this does is stagger the seams so that when we flip this right side out, they're not as bulky. There's a smoother finish on the edge of the fabric. So again, all the way around, we're cutting off just the one layer. So it is a little bit shorter than the other layer. So now we're going to clip the corners, and to do that, where that diagonal stitch is, you're going to cut a diagonal very close to that stitch. If you took this and folded it back on each side, these edges should meet like that. And again, that's to help reduce bulk when we turn it. We're going to do the same on the opposite corner and the same on the corners on the other piece. So it will now look like this. Now that's called clipping the corner. Now we have to do another kind of clip right in this area here. So this is where the dot is. So I'm going to simply take my shears and do a straight cut very close to the thread in that corner. Same on the other side. Straight cut, very close, but don't cut your threads. If you accidentally cut your thread, you have to go back and resew it because you'll have a hole there if you don't do that. So that's what this piece looks like when it's finished. Then you're going to do the same with the two straps. So we're going to trim off approximately half. And this one, just one side, they're both the same. So on one side, you're going to cut the one side a little bit shorter, you're going to grade it. So if you ever have a pattern that says to grade the seams, this is what it means, to cut one shorter than the other. Now at the fold there, I'm going to do just a little angle cut. And that will allow me to clip that one off. Then same thing, we're going to clip this corner like that. And you want to do the same with the other piece. And there's your straps, trimmed and graded. Then you're going to turn these right side out. So I'm simply going to flip these edges, and I've just got this pen not open, but you could use the end of a pencil, and we want to push out the top here. Now the straps are a little bit trickier to turn. I have a gadget at school called a tube turner that I forgot to bring home, and so asked me to show you how to use it. Otherwise, it's a matter of just finessing it, and it'll take me a couple minutes to do this, but you just keep working on it. And you want to do both straps as well. We're going to do some understitching on this piece, and what understitching does is it's a row of stitching that is on the wrong side that you don't see from the right side, but it's going to help keep this lining piece from popping up in the front. And so what you do is take this, we can't go right to the corners, but we can start about right here. And we're going to go to here, and underneath your seam is going to go towards the lining part. So I'm pulling the seam so that it's towards the lining, and then you flatten this out as much as you're able to. It's a little tricky because of the shape of it. We'll see how this works here. That's going to work. So I'm starting at the pin. This is regular stitch length, 2.5, and I'm actually sewing about 2 or 3 millimeters on the lining side close to this seam, and that's about the right distance in order for this to work the best. So press your foot down, you're going to back stitch, and then I'm making sure my seam is towards the lining underneath there. And I'm going to sew up to the other pin. I'm just being careful I'm not sewing something I don't want sewn here. And when I get to that pin, I'm going to back stitch and cut my threads. So the stitching is on the lining side, and you can see already that it's pulling this down so that it's not going to show on the right side of the fabric, and we're also going to press this. So then you're going to press this, and you just want to try and make sure that the lining is on the bottom and you're not seeing the edges of the lining on the top. So that's the top piece, And then your straps, same thing. Now if you find, these ones are pretty good, but if you find your corners aren't out quite enough, you can take a pin and just gently pull the corners out, but you want to be careful because you can make holes doing that too if you're not careful with the end of the pin. So press both sides of the straps. And those pieces are done. The buttonholes go on the two sides of the front here. So I'm just getting ready to mark this with my friction marker. And I'm not actually going to use the pattern. I'm going to put the button where I think it should end up, and these are the buttons I'm using. And I'm going to make a mark where the buttonhole is going to start. And I want the same on the other side. So you can use your seam gauge to measure it and then make a mark on the other side the same distance down. And I don't need to mark the entire length of the buttonhole because the buttonhole setting on the machine will do that. So you're going to use your buttonhole foot. You open up the back of the foot and the button sits right in here, and you tighten the foot on the button and that will hold it in place. And then take off the foot that's on the machine, and you're going to, this part of it's going to be behind, and you're going to attach the bar here to the machine. And then on the machines at school, you change it to mode 2, and then it is number 21 in mode 2. And then you need to pull down this, your machines have this as well, this black piece that's just behind the presser foot area. And this tells it when to turn around and when it's working on the buttonhole. Now the buttonhole sews backwards, so I don't want to put this in like this because it'll sew off the fabric. So I'm going to put this in this direction. I'm going to start here, and the buttonhole is going to sew backwards along this. And if you have trouble getting it in there, you can lift up on your presser foot and it gives you a little more room, so you can manipulate this piece in place. And I'm centering this underneath here. It's a little bit of a small area to work in. And I can see there's a little kind of window here in the front of the, right under where the needle is, and I want to center in that area. And then once you have that in position, the machine does the rest for the most part. So I'm just making sure that nothing happens. Like if it starts sewing in one spot, stop and ask for help. So it's going to go backwards and then forward. Down the other side. And when it's done, it slows down and then it stops, and the machine will probably beep. Mine doesn't do that. And then you cut your threads, and that's your first buttonhole, and the machine's all ready to do a second one, so you just line that one up and do your second one. And again, at school you have a buttonhole cutter that you can use. I do not have that gadget, so I just snip the center with my embroidery scissors and snip each end, being careful not to cut the threads of the buttonhole. And there's our buttonholes. So on the front piece, after you've done your buttonholes, go to the serger, and we're just going to serge just along the bottom edge without trimming anything off it. So we're going to line up on the edge here and serge. And again, I'm using a darker thread so it's easy for you to see. Normally I would match my thread to my fabric. And this needs to be secured, so I am going to just tie my ends on both of these, but you could weave them or glue them. You're not going to, this won't be visible when it's attached to the rest of the skirt.